So my guest today is an assistant director in the CCPD, Rachel Wood. She's also a career coach, and I brought her on today because we're going to have a conversation about one of our platforms. So Rachel, welcome to my show.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
No problem. So I brought you on today for you to make an announcement about our platform, Wisr. So why don't you go ahead and tell the people what that is?
Sure. So we announced it via email. I don't know that many people read email these days, back in March, but our platform, our third-party platform that was connecting students and alumni together, similarly to the way that Facebook connects folks together, was called Wisr, and we have sunsetted that program. So we no longer are offering that platform. It functioned somewhat similarly to LinkedIn.com, but it was just for K students and alumni. And so I'm here to answer questions about why we sunsetted our use of that particular platform and what students can do instead.
You know, that's actually a really great transition into the next question about why we decided to sunset. But before going into that, I will say that I am actually really excited to actually do this, partly because as a career coach, I frequently, well, not super frequently, but I do regularly get questions about Wiser. I'm kind of like, I mean, it's going away, but I don't know how widely we're talking about that yet. And then I did two back-to-back podcast interviews where both the interviewees like reference about like how great Wiser is. I'm just like, man, this is super awkward. I actually just may cut out that answer in post. So talk to me a little bit about why the decision was made to sunset Wiser.
Well, I'm really glad you bring that up because I would imagine if you look back at the answers to the questions, they might mention Wisr, the platform, and they might talk about a little bit about how easy it was to foster that connection with that alum. But my guess is the main thing that they were so excited about was the connection that they made with the alum and the conversation that resulted from that and the genuine relationship that may have resulted from that.
Sure.
And that is the main point of why we started our relationship with Wisr, is because we wanted to foster more of those kinds of connections. When we started it, it was a really great experiment. It was seen as kind of revolutionary at the time that we were going to be having this sort of proprietary network for only K students and alumni. It was going to be connecting specific students to specific alumni around specific interests. So you could search by industry, you could search by alumni that had signed up to do specific things, like specifically I'll review students' resumes, or specifically I'll offer a place for students to crash on my couch or in my spare room during a summer internship, things like that. And it worked okay for those things, but for several years we just had a real lack of engagement on the platform. So we tried everything to get students and alumni interested in the platform and then also engaged once they joined. We saw that mainly the issues were that students, all users of Wisr, had to create their own profile on Wisr.
Yep.
And that's, if you are a student right now, you're probably thinking, yes, I have to have a this account and a that account and a this account. I'm constantly typing in my name and my major and what I'm interested in. And so Wisr was just another account that students had to log into and update and keep up to date as they gained more and more experience, or as their interests changed. And for alumni, it was the same way. So if people weren't constantly using the platform, they may or may not be keeping it up to date. Where a site like LinkedIn.com, which is a much bigger and more well-known site, and of course open to not just Kalamazoo College alumni, people are inherently more interested in keeping their LinkedIn profiles up to date because they are a public version of their resume. That's not to say that everybody always keeps their LinkedIn profiles up to date, but it's just more likely that they'll do so. We just found that there are so many more alumni that are on LinkedIn than were joining Wisr. And the main benefits of Wisr were more on the career services end. Like, we could see when connections were made, and so we could sort of track things and have some data and metrics. And that was helpful, but only in it that it was showing us if it was a good investment for us or not.
Sure.
Right. And we can't track, we can't say, oh, 30 students reached out to alumni on LinkedIn this week. We don't know whether or not that's happening. All we know is when we do presentations in classrooms or for student organizations. Or what mostly happens, we do lots of one-on-one conversations with students and try to help them get connected to alumni. We don't know for sure if those connections actually happen. That was one big benefit for Wisr that we lost when we sunsetted the program. But it was let's be honest, it was a major expense.
Yeah.
And when the pandemic hit, we had to look at, are we being good stewards of the college's money? Are students getting the benefit from the money that we are spending? Are they getting the direct benefit from that? And when we found that there are other ways to get the students their benefit, maybe we would lose some of our benefit on the back end, but it was worth it to be good stewards of college funds.
That totally makes sense. And, one of the things that I think you touched upon is that, like, the primary purpose of Wisr was really to act as that facilitator to connect students and alumni. And so now that Wisr is sunset and it's going away, how are students going to be able to do that now?
It's a really good question. So of course, there's my canned answer that students might roll their eyes at, which is come talk to a career coach. And I hear that. I hear that it can be annoying for me to say that that's the first thing to do. The reason I would say to do that is, number one, we can help you practice or look at what your outreach is going to be to make sure that it's appropriate and you can feel really confident in that outreach. Also, we might have relationships with alumni that are in fields of interest to you. So we may already know of alumni that already work with students, or already have opportunities, or know people who do have opportunities. And so it's really worth your time to have a career coaching appointment. However, we also know that you're allowed to just go on LinkedIn and reach out to alumni. So we also have resources on our website on a few templates on how to reach out to somebody that you don't know at all, that you just found on LinkedIn. We have 2 quick videos. I think both of them are under 2 minutes long, that show you how to use 2 resources: the college's alumni directory that you have access to as a student, and LinkedIn.com's Kalamazoo College's page on LinkedIn,
Yep.
where you can look directly for Kalamazoo College grads and what they're doing now, and kind of play those 2 things in 2 different browser tabs and be able to find who you want to reach out to, and then maybe a 3rd browser tab that's got some of our templates on it, so that you can get a little bit of generic advice on how you might do that. Certainly there's going to be a wide gamut of people, and in terms of how familiar they are with how to do this sort of networking outreach thing, how confident they feel about that. And so regardless of where you're at on that spectrum, I do think it's a good idea to come talk to a career coach, or even come to drop-in hours or something like that, just to make sure that if you have any questions here or there, or you just want to practice, or you just want to say, does this email that I'm going to write to this person sound good? We might say, oh, in addition to that person that you want to write to, you should also write this similar message to these 3 other people that we know would be great people for you to reach out to that are in that field.
One of the things that I really like that you just said, that I completely agree with, and I can't state enough, is that it is so valuable to come talk to a career coach in situations like this, because oftentimes we do know people. One example comes to mind that happened a couple weeks ago is I was in a career coaching appointment with a student, and they were talking about a potential interest in social work, but they didn't know if it was right for them. And I was just like, oh, hey, like, one of my student workers actually is a social worker right now. We have a great relationship. If I email her and say, like, hey, can you talk to the student, she will 100% respond to you. And that's happened. Like, as soon as we got done, I'm like, oh, hey, this person, can you talk to the student who's interested? They're like, yeah, totally, I'll talk to them right now.
Yes.
And so to me, I think that's something that can't be overstated about coming to a career coach. It's just like the relationships that we automatically have.
Yeah. And many of these alumni we may have worked with when they were students. Many of them may have been involved in any one of a number of events or programs with the Career Center. So we know the kind of advice that they're going to give. We know the kind of connections that they have. We know the commitment that they have to K students. And that's not to say that anybody else that you reach out to wouldn't have that same kind of commitment. It's just why not go with a warm connection if there might be one. I've had that experience multiple times. Yes, where I've said, oh, I'm doing the thing where I'm looking up a particular interest area on LinkedIn, and a ton of first degree connections of mine show up.
Yep.
And I might know them from for a lot of different reasons. But sending a message in advance and saying, hey, will you talk to Joe real quick? I just met with him and he's really interested in marketing, and that's what you did your SIP on, and then that's what you went into. And so can I give him your email address? And that can serve as such a warm connection that is so much more likely to get a positive response. And then asking alumni for something specific, like a 15 or 20 minutes.
Yeah.
That's something that I can do that to anybody that I've worked with in the past and not feel guilty at all, saying, hey, can I have like 15, 20 minutes of your time? They're so often like, yeah, when's good for you? And so if I can pass that along to, yeah, well, I really want the 20 minutes for my friend Pam over here, who's interested in an informational interview with you to ask about how you decided on this career path, what you did while you were at K that sort of prepared you, how you got into it, if it was a circuitous path, all that kinds of stuff. And those conversations are genuine, and they don't necessarily, it's not like you're going to have one conversation and you're automatically at the end of that conversation going to have an internship or a job. You could, but it's really the point that you're going to be forging that relationship, and they're going to tell you people that you should talk to after them. Oh, you should talk to my friend these three friends that also work in the field, but may have something open for this summer that I don't have.
Yep.
Or you should talk to so-and-so because you're considering going to this graduate school and she went there and she can tell you about, what that was like, things like that. And I'm just impressed daily by the commitment that K alumni have to students surrounding career development. That's the part of alumni commitment that I see. And I just, especially the Hornet Huddles program that we just did with seniors, where we had 50 some alumni do, I don't know, somewhere around 200 appointments with seniors. I got to sort of peek into some of those as I was on the back end in Zoom, and they were just so warm and genuine and
gracious with their time.
Yeah, and not stuffy. It's you already have this connection to this person because they also had to do a SIP, or they also had this professor that you also have. You have all these things in common because you're going to a school like Kalamazoo College. So why not take advantage of that? And early on, you don't need to wait till you're a senior to start doing that.
So specifically, as we transition to start using a platform like LinkedIn to facilitate these connections, what are some of the benefits that LinkedIn has to help students make these connections?
Sure. Besides the fact that LinkedIn, people are inherently more likely to have their public LinkedIn profile kept up to date. You also have, there's the Kalamazoo College Alumni Association group on LinkedIn. So if you join that, even as a student, you are now in the same group as someone, which can sometimes, depending on how everybody's individual LinkedIn membership is structured, can sometimes make it a little bit easier to use LinkedIn itself to reach out to someone. There's about 13,000, it varies every time I check, Kalamazoo College alumni on LinkedIn. And there were several hundred alumni on the Wisr platform. That was awesome. But it could never compete with the sheer volume of alumni that are on LinkedIn. And a lot of times I work with, I don't know if you have this thing where you say, so do you have a LinkedIn profile to a student? And what does a student say when you say that to them?
It's either no or it's yes, but I never have updated it.
Yes. Either no, or I have one, but I haven't done anything with it.
Yeah.
You don't have to have done any. I mean, this is not the best career coaching move for me to say, I'll be honest, but like, you don't have to have done anything with your LinkedIn profile to use it to research Kalamazoo College alumni on LinkedIn. You just have to have one, and it's free. And we don't ever recommend that you need to have like a premium version of LinkedIn.
Yeah.
You can do this stuff with a free version, which is good. And yes, if you put your resume on LinkedIn, then if you reach out to an alum and you mention that you found them on LinkedIn, they might look you up on LinkedIn, and then they can read a little bit more about you before their meeting. You can just copy and paste bullet points from your resume onto LinkedIn, so you don't have to type it all out. But you can use it without spending hours and hours on your profile if you don't want to do that. So yeah, I think those are the main benefits. If a person that you find on LinkedIn doesn't have contact information listed, you've now found their name and where they work. You can probably use those two things in a Google search better than I can
Yeah.
to find their work email address. And or you can look them up on the Kalamazoo College alumni directory and find a personal email address as well.
So let's actually talk about that. So say that there's a student that's listening to this and like, oh, that's actually something I'm interested in doing. So they hop on LinkedIn. If you just go to the search bar and search for Kalamazoo College, you'll find our page and can easily find the alumni directory. One of the things I like about LinkedIn is that oftentimes the profile that a person has on LinkedIn is a little bit more robust than probably what they had on Wisr, or was identical because oftentimes LinkedIn had a button or Wisr had a button just to like sign in with your LinkedIn account. And I would
Yep.
often tell students like, actually, what you should do is create a LinkedIn account first and then sign into Wisr so you don't
Yes.
actually have to create two
You need to do it
profiles.
twice.
Yeah. But yeah, so they've done all this work. They've done the searching. They found an alumni who they'd like to actually get in contact with. Like, so what is the next step for them to actually go and actually find their contact information?
Sure. So definitely you can Google their name and where they work, and sometimes you can get the generic naming convention email. I don't know what it's called. Like if you're trying to find somebody that works at Kalamazoo College, it's first name dot last name at kazoo.edu is their
Yeah.
email address. So that's a lot of it is finding a work email address that way. Then you can go right into the portal. You can go to the alumni directory. You have access as a student, and you can just search their name, their first and last name. If they may have changed their name for any reason, you could search their class year and either their first name or their last name, and
Yeah.
usually you can maybe match up the results that come up. You can also search the alumni directory by location and by major, and probably some other things that I just can't remember off the top of my head, but it's going to give you whatever the college has as the contact information that the alums was willing to share, which again, I shouldn't be surprised for how long I worked at K, but alumni have shared a lot of contact information with students,
Yeah.
and they know that only students can access it, and it's right there. So it's a great thing to check out.
And if a student's listening to this and you've never actually been to the alumni directory before, you can just access it by going to kzoo.edu/alumni.
Yes.
And literally the first thing you'll see there is the alumni directory, and you can just click through and sign in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the next question I have is, so like, now we're on like the third step of this process. So like they've gone on LinkedIn, they found somebody to actually get in contact with, they've gone on the alumni directory, and like they found their email address. So how do they actually go about in like crafting an email? Like what are the things that they should say? How should they actually reach out to this person?
Yeah, it's I would insert the step in there just because it's a shameless plug, but I'm going to do it. I would insert the step in there of check with the career coach just to see just if there's a connection that they already have, and if they can help you with crafting that email. But
Yep.
it doesn't have to be that long of an email. If you think about if I'm talking directly to the student, if you think about how long of an email you like to read, it's probably not very long.
Yep.
So you don't need to give them your whole story. You just right away you need to capture their interest and why you're writing to them. So it's, hi, I'm Rachel Wood. I found your name on LinkedIn when I was searching for English teachers.
Yep.
And I am looking to interview an English teacher about their experience. That's like one, maybe two sentences.
Mm-hmm.
And then would you be open to a 30-minute conversation during your lunch break, or 20-minute or 15-minute, whatever you want to say? Here's a couple of the questions I anticipate asking. Maybe put 2 or 3 bullet points of the kinds of questions that you might want to ask. If you need help, there's like really long list of those kinds of great questions on our website. And then what time would sometime in the next couple of weeks work for you? I can be reached via email, or you can even give them your phone number. And asking for something specific and telling them what you're going to be asking in your meeting is really helpful because it makes it easier and easier to say yes. So if you just say, I'm looking to do an informational interview, or I'm looking for a mentor, those things are great, but somebody may be a little bit reluctant to respond because they don't know exactly how much time you're going to be, you're asking for. Now, if they say, yeah, we can talk for 30 minutes during my lunch break, you respect that. And at 29 minutes, you say, I know we're out of time and I want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah.
And who knows, the conversation could go longer than that, but they committed to, they said that they would give you that amount of time. And you just want to stick with that and at least be respectful of their time.
Yeah, the thing I frequently explain it to students when I'm talking to them in career coach appointments is I say, as like just kind of like flip and say, like, imagine it from your perspective. If you got an email address from somebody who you didn't know that's just like, hey, so and so, I'm thinking about applying to Kalamazoo College. I'd love to talk to you for 30 minutes and just ask you some questions about like your experience at K. Like, would you be willing to do it? And like, sure, you probably would be, because you're like, even though I don't know them, this is a subject I know about, and they told me how long it's going to take. But if that same person just sent you an email just like, hey, I'm thinking about applying to Kalamazoo College, can I just chat with you sometime about your experience? Like, I don't know, dude. Like, do you want to talk for 30 minutes or for 3 hours? Like, that's,
Right.
And so the more that you can tell them, like, specifically what it is that you want to talk about and give them a rough idea of just, like, how long it's going to take, more likely than not, like I said, our alums are super kind and gracious with their time. They're like, yeah, they'll 100% do that. And then the last thing I always say is just like, yeah, usually just try to remember to send a follow-up email, just thanking them for taking the time to do it after you're done. And that's about it.
I will also say, if you feel like all of this is something that you're behind on, and like if you're listening to this and you're about to graduate in a week, or you're like, oh, I should have done this a while ago. It's never too late to do this. And even if you are, I would say, even if you are getting ready to submit your application to something next week or this week, you can still reach out to, if you can look on look on LinkedIn and see if there's any alumni that work at the organization you're applying to or have worked there recently. It's worth a shot to send them an email and say, hi. They might not be the hiring manager at all. They might not even work in the same department of the organization that you're applying to. Be like, I am applying for this job at Oakley, and you can name drop the job. That's fine. I would love to get 15 minutes of your time because I have my application ready, but you actually work there. I'd love to hear about it, or have you look at would you be willing to glance over my resume really quick? And again, if you give them a time limit of 15, 20, 30 minutes, something like that, it's easy to say yes to. And I would strongly encourage you to do that. Even if you've used VMOC, our resume platform, and you've had a career coaching appointment, those are both great. If you're ready to submit that application, just see if there's somebody at K, somebody who went to K that works there. You might be surprised. It might be a small nonprofit organization. It might be a small company, and there still might be a K connection.
Yep.
Having that is invaluable. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to students and recent alumni that have gotten some nugget of information from an informational interview that changed the way that they approached an interview, or that changed something in their application because they just knew something that they didn't know previously. Something about the culture of the company, like that was related to the dress code, or something about the hiring manager. The hiring manager is obsessed with skiing, and now you know that, and you also have skied in Aspen. I don't know. Yeah. I'm making this up, but now you have something to talk about, right? That helps form more of a genuine relationship. Yeah. I just it's a good idea to do, even if you're not feeling like, oh, I'm past the stage of like needing to grow my network. You're really never past the stage of needing to grow your network.
And one thing I would just add on to that, that I actually just found out when I did an interview a couple weeks ago with Bill Gallagher, is one of the things that he said is that he currently works for YouTube, and like they have a program in which if they refer somebody, if he was to refer somebody and they got hired, he actually gets a monetary bonus for doing that. So there's a lot of times where like, you're not actually imposing upon them. It's actually in their benefit to actually help you out because it helps them also. And that was one of those things I'm like, did not know that. I will be sure to tell people that. Like, now, granted, that's not every company, and that probably like happens more frequently in like tech companies and companies that are larger in scale. But it also is just to reinforce the idea that like, no, you're not bothering them. They, a lot of times they are absolutely happy to help you. So please feel free to reach out to them.
Yeah. The worst that can happen is that they say, no, sorry, I'm too busy. Or they just more than likely, if they're too busy, they just don't read your email. But you wrote a professional email that isn't really bugging them. So it's not like they're going to say, oh, I can't believe this person asked for my time. I'm going to go tell the hiring manager. If anything, they're going to say, oh, yeah, I didn't get a chance to respond to that email, but they're a real go-getter because they're clearly really interested in this company because they asked to meet with me. I just ran out of time to respond to that message or something. So it's really not a bad idea. And once you have written a couple of these emails, you'll see how short they are and how they can be less intimidating to rewrite because you can use language, you can reuse language, and you can just you can do it again and again, and it becomes less and less scary with more practice.
So you mentioned it earlier that you had created a couple of very short tutorials showing students via screen share video on how to actually do these things. If they wanted to find that content, where could they find it at?
Great question. Speaking of Bill Gallagher, they're on our YouTube channel. Bill Gallagher helped us with our retrieve our YouTube channel that had been long defunct. We have those are on YouTube. It's just at KZCCPD is our handle on every social media channel that we're on. So it's just youtube.com/KZCCPD. There's links to our channel from our website. There's a few other videos on there right now, but again, they're probably the shortest two, and they say right on the top that one of them is understanding LinkedIn, I think, and one of them is the K alumni tool or K alumni directory. So really easy to find, and they're also linked from a page on our site called Learning from and Connecting with Alumni that has other sets of questions to ask during an informational interview. A template that you might use if you have no idea where to start for how to reach out to an alum. That kind of thing is all on a page on our website as well.
And I'll also drop a link in the show notes of this episode so anybody listening can just click on that and go directly to there.
Perfect.
Before we wrap up, is there any piece of advice that you want to give to our current seniors who may still be looking for a job right now or still trying to figure out their next steps after graduation?
You know, I've been thinking about this question because I knew it was going to come. And narrowing it down to one piece is so difficult. I don't subscribe to the just follow your passion thing. It's cool, I guess, if you do or if other people do, but I think it's got it's got a lot of problems with it, and I think it's more about finding out what are your talents, and how can you get somebody to pay you or otherwise provide for your sustenance for you using those talents.
Yep.
Your first job, I would say that, and then I would also say your first job is extremely, extremely unlikely to be your last job. That was the case 20 years ago. Every year it becomes more and more likely that you're going to have more and more jobs before you stop working.
Yep.
And so, especially in an economy that is as volatile as this is, with everybody writing a different blog post every day about these are the real sectors to join, and get into fintech and definitely do healthcare and definitely stay away from this industry or sector. Great. Okay. Everybody's going to have all kinds of different advice on that. And the fact of the matter is the economy is if you've been paying attention to anything, and you all know better because you have ridden through this pandemic as a college student, you know that predicting the future is not something we're inherently very good at. So I would figure out what values you truly hold, what's most important to you, what you're willing to compromise on and what you're not willing to compromise on. Like, will you work for this kind of an organization or not? You are the only person that knows the answers to those questions. And what are your goals? Are your goals right now that you need to make enough money that you can pay your rent? Cool. Do not be worried that some job that you take right now is going to be the job that you have 6 years from now, or even 2 years from now. Um, Getting some work experience is great for your resume, regardless of what kind of work experience. Well, most work experience, I would say, is great. You might. I've talked to students. They've said, well, I don't know if I should take this job because it's not related to what I studied, and or it doesn't fully align with my values. I say, that you're the best judge of what compromises you're willing to make and not make. That's not for me to decide.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, you also know what your fiscal situation is and what you need to do. There's lots of jobs out there right now. I mean, there's plenty of places are just begging people to work, right? And you have to be cognizant of what is the cost of living in your geographic area or the area you plan to go to, and what's going to be a living wage in that area. Because, for example, $18-19 an hour in Kalamazoo, Michigan versus Minneapolis, Minnesota, drastically different. Much
Absolutely.
easier to have that being a living wage not great, but a living wage in Kalamazoo, Michigan. You'd have to have 5 roommates in Minneapolis. So that's probably a lot of separate pieces of advice, but those are the things that come to mind when I think about students that are graduating right now. And reach out to us. We have a vested interest in you finding a job and being happy with that. And so we will work with you individually, and we don't go away just because you graduate. Yes, we want to see you as soon as possible in your college career, but if as soon as possible means this July, then that's what it means. We'll start wherever you are, and we'll help you. I promise.
So I really like everything that you just said, and I would just add 2 things to that. The first being, one of the things that you mentioned is that the cost of living can drastically be different depending on where you live. There is a resource that I'm going to name that actually, Rachel, you actually showed me a couple years ago. And if anybody listening does a Google search for Nerd Wallet and their cost of living calculator, you'll find it. And it basically allows you to do that, of put in hey, I make X in Kalamazoo. What would that be like in this other city? And it'll break down for you what that looks like in terms of what rent is like, what groceries are like, what transportation costs are like, so on and so forth. And like Rachel said, it's kind of sometimes it's sobering to just be oh, if you make, $45,000 in Kalamazoo, which is not, amazing, but it's perfectly fine to live comfortably.
Yeah.
To then go to a New York or a San Francisco, it's you need to make $115,000, and it's
Yeah.
what is life right now? I don't even know
Yes.
how I could do that. So
Right.
that's the first thing I would say. And then the second thing I would just say to kind of follow up what you said is that one of the things that I oftentimes hear that students think about, and I think that you're right, is that they put so much emphasis on making this decision the right one. And when in reality, the thing I always tell them is dude, if you start this and you find out that you don't like it, just go do something else. At this point in your life, it is easier than it's ever going to be to pick up and relocate, because oftentimes at this point in your life, you probably don't have a mortgage. You probably are not going to have a massive car payment. You're probably not going to have to think about a spouse or a partner that you're married to, and what are they going to do if you move? Or you're not going to have to think about, oh, I have to take my kids out of school and away from all their friends. Your lives are at this point, for better, honestly, a lot simpler for you to just be well, my lease runs out in 6 months or whatever. Maybe I'm just going to quit this job and just do some side hustles and stuff because I hate this job, and it'll be enough to pay the bills. And when my lease runs out, I'm moving someplace else, and I'll figure out what my next step is when I get there. And yeah, I can understand for some people that sounds a little bit intimidating and scary, but also, as Rachel said, we are here to help facilitate that transition. And so if you ever have any questions about any of that stuff, feel free to schedule an appointment with a career coach. Before we wrap up, Are there any plugs or anything else that you want students to know about?
I really encourage you to follow at KZoo CCPD on social media. I know that your email inbox can be kind of on overload. We do still send email and use that as a primary communication for letting you know about events and programs that are coming up. But we also advertise them on our social media channels. We are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. YouTube is more like I guess a resource or a compendium of videos that we've collected and are continuing to make. Use us early and often, and never be afraid that you are not far enough along in the process to come see us, because I've worked with seniors who've graduated who've, this is surprising maybe, but who've never made a resume before.
Yep.
I've worked with students who walk in, just sit down and say, I have no idea what I'm doing. I thought I wanted to do this and now I don't, and now I don't know what I want to do at all. It doesn't matter where you are in the career development process. It doesn't matter. We want to work with you. And we understand that everybody is coming in with their unique set of challenges, advantages, privileges, all kinds of things. We want to work with you and where you're at. And we want to get real in terms of what's real for you. Like, maybe you can't quit your job that you hate because you have to make $15 an hour in order to be able to XYZ. You got student loans coming up, whatever. And so we're going to talk about, okay, so what are realistically some things? Have you thought about if you need to do something that is gig-like, but still makes some guaranteed money? Like, have you thought about substitute teaching? There's all kinds of these random things that we have seen work for other alumni that we would be happy to work with you on to craft a plan that makes sense for you based on your unique situation.
That is some really great advice. And we will leave it there. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on my show.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks for having me again.